Remember that time a cast of mostly unknown stage actors flew to an active military zone in the Israeli desert, started filming a rock opera about the crucifixion with no backup props, and somehow made one of the most spiritually resonant films of the decade? The year was 1972. Ted Neeley was in the desert heat, screaming his way through Gethsemane for real, even though none of it was being recorded. Carl Anderson was doing the same, tearing himself apart as Judas, while Israeli fighter jets nobody ordered tore through the shot overhead. Norman Jewison was behind the camera, Protestant minister's son from Toronto, directing a film that the entire world had decided only a Jewish director could make. Nothing was going according to plan, yet everything worked anyway. Today we're counting down 15 weird facts about Jesus Christ Superstar, from the auditions that rewrote rock history to the casting choice that accidentally made John Travolta a superstar. Stick around for number 1 because it involves the most spiritual moment in the entire film, and nobody planned it at all. But before we dive in, hit like and subscribe to Remember That Time for more behind-the-scenes deep dives into the films we can never forget. Now let's get into it. Number 15, they started filming 2 weeks before Munich. On August 18, 1972, Norman Jewison and his cast began shooting in the caves of Beit Guvrin in the Israeli desert. The Israeli government had partially funded the film, offering a 23.5% rebate on foreign currency to help establish an Israeli film center. They wanted this production to succeed. They were invested, literally. So Jewison's crew stayed. They kept shooting across more than 20 locations, ancient ruins, desert cliffs, the Dead Sea, filming a message of peace and forgiveness. While history moved toward violence around them, fighter jets appeared in shots. Tanks rolled past in the distance. These weren't production design. They were just there. The film that religious groups were calling blasphemous was being made in a modern holy war zone, and the cast kept singing.
Am I a Jew?
I have no kingdom. In this world I'm through.
Talk to me, Jesus Christ.
There may be a kingdom for me somewhere, if you only knew.
Number 14. Everyone thought the director was Jewish. He wasn't. Norman Jewison had just directed Fiddler on the Roof in 1971, so when he signed on for Jesus Christ Superstar, everyone drew the same conclusion. The last name was Jewison. He'd made the definitive film about Jewish tradition. The controversy practically wrote itself. A Jewish director making a film about Jesus Christ.
I always thought I was Jewish because when I was a kid, when I was 5, 6 years old, they called me Jew boy and Jewy.
People had a lot of opinions about what that meant. Studio executives assumed it. Religious groups protesting the film assumed it. Some cast members assumed it. The debate was already raging about whether a Jewish director could tell the Christian story with proper reverence. The truth? Norman Jewison was Protestant, raised Methodist in Toronto. Parents owned a convenience store. Not a drop of Jewish heritage. He later told friends deadpan, "I thought I should do something for the Goyim." The irony is almost too layered to process. The entire controversy about a Jewish director making a film about Jesus turned out to be an argument about the wrong man entirely. Every protester, every think piece, every outraged letter to the studio, all of it aimed at a Methodist kid from Toronto who thought the whole confusion was quietly hilarious and, by several accounts, didn't rush to correct it. Number 13. Yvonne Elliman was discovered, filling in for a no-show. In 1969, Yvonne Elliman moved to London with no real plan. She was broke, performing in folk clubs for tips, and on one particular night at the Pheasantry on Kings Road, she was filling in for jazz singer John Hendricks, who'd no-showed and left the club owner in a panic. Elliman stepped up and sang everything she knew. Folk songs, covers, whatever she could pull from memory, including the Blind Faith song, Can't Find My Way Home. Andrew Lloyd Webber was in the audience that night. He'd come to hear Hendricks. He stayed for Elliman. Within weeks, she was in a recording studio, laying down vocals for the original Jesus Christ Superstar concept album, alongside Ian Gillan from Deep Purple. She became the definitive voice of Mary Magdalene, on the album, on Broadway, and in the film.
Food and face, let me try to cool that fish beer.
And Eric Clapton? People assume he discovered her, but that came later. She met him through her husband Bill Oakes, president of RSO Records, ended up singing backup on Clapton's I Shot the Sheriff in 1974, and toured with his band for years after that. But it started with a no-show jazz singer, a panicked club owner, and a broke girl who stepped up and sang everything she had. How close she came to not being there that night is the question nobody can answer. Number 12. Ted Neeley auditioned for Judas, got Jesus instead. When Ted Neeley walked into auditions for Jesus Christ Superstar, he wanted to play Judas. He saw it as the dramatically interesting role, the betrayer wrestling with guilt and doubt, the man with all the real interior conflict. Jesus, by contrast, had to be serene, had to be above it all. Where was the fun in that? Norman Jewison looked at him and said, "Try out for the other guy." Neeley ended up understudying Jesus in the original 1971 Broadway production, while Carl Anderson understudied Judas. When the Los Angeles production needed a Jesus, Neeley got his shot and earned a standing ovation. Then came the film. And the role he hadn't wanted became the thing he'd do for the rest of his life. Over 5,000 times, 5 decades of stage productions. Ted Neeley has now played Jesus Christ more than almost any human being alive, in a career built entirely on a part he walked into an audition room not wanting.
Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing.
He wanted to play the man who betrays Jesus. Instead, he became Jesus. And Judas, Carl Anderson made that legendary. Together, two friends who got the roles they didn't originally want created the most famous betrayal in cinema history. Number 11. Rock legends almost played Jesus. Before Ted Neeley, Jewison was thinking considerably bigger. Casting notes he wrote on Beverly Hills Hotel stationery, which survive and have been referenced in multiple accounts of the production, reveal just how ambitious his early vision was. The list reads like a fantasy rock band lineup: Mick Jagger, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Robert Plant, Barry Gibb, Ian Gillan, who had already voiced Jesus on the 1970 concept album that put Jesus Christ Superstar on the map. Gillan seemed like the obvious choice. He'd already done it. He was the voice audiences knew. But Deep Purple were one of the biggest rock acts on the planet in 1972, deep into a relentless touring schedule, and scheduling conflicts made Gillan unavailable. The exact financial conversations have never been fully documented, but the outcome was clear. He stayed with the band, and the film moved on without him. As for Jagger, Lennon, McCartney, Plant, and Gibb, none of them took the part. Whether Jewison formally approached each of them or whether they were names on a hotel notepad that never became phone calls, we'll probably never know for certain. What we do know is that every single one of them passed, and the role went to a stage actor with extraordinary vocal range and zero mainstream name recognition. Ted Neeley wasn't famous. He was just perfect, and sometimes that's the better casting call. Number 10, they sang live, even though everything was pre-recorded. Standard practice for movie musicals: record everything at a professional studio, then have the actors lip sync on set. Jesus Christ Superstar followed the model. Every note was recorded at Olympic Studios in London months before the cast ever stepped into the Israeli desert. But Ted Neeley and Carl Anderson couldn't just mouth the words. According to both men, Jewison actively encouraged them to sing full voice during filming, believing the performances would feel dead if they were only going through the motions. The actors agreed, so they actually sang, hitting those notes in brutal desert heat, pushing their voices to their limits, even though none of it was being captured by microphones. This meant perfectly matching the timing and phrasing of vocals they'd recorded months earlier, while delivering emotionally raw performances under physically punishing conditions. Any slight variation in timing would be visible on screen. Watch Carl Anderson's face during Superstar.
I don't want your blood money.
Oh, that doesn't matter. Our expenses are good.
The sequence where Judas questions Jesus after the crucifixion. That's not just acting. That's genuine vocal strain from a man pushing his instrument to its absolute limit, knowing the sound will never be heard. The most emotionally authentic performances in the film came from voices nobody recorded. Number 9, Bob Bingham's voice seems impossible. Bob Bingham played Caiaphas, the high priest who conspires against Jesus, and his voice stopped production cold. The bass notes he hit were so impossibly deep that crew members would stop what they were doing just to listen when he opened his mouth. People who've seen the film are still convinced, 50 years later, that the audio must be pitch shifted or electronically processed. It isn't. Stories from the production describe Bingham wearing specially designed platform shoes, allegedly 4 inches at the heel, nearly flat at the toe, forcing him to walk on his toes throughout filming. Uncomfortable on flat ground, potentially torturous on the steep, rocky desert inclines where many of his scenes were shot. Bingham himself admitted in the years following the film that he had no idea what basic film terminology meant during production. He didn't know what it meant to hit a mark. The crew had to shoot his scaffolding scene about a dozen times before he understood where to stand. He was, in other words, not a film actor. He was a man with an extraordinary voice who'd wandered in from the edges of the industry and created one of cinema's most memorable vocal performances without fully understanding the medium he was working in. After the film, he made exactly one more stage appearance, playing God in Arthur Miller's Up from Paradise in Ann Arbor, Michigan in 1974. Then he left show business entirely and became the chief operating officer of a Talon zipper factory. The voice of biblical authority spent the rest of his career managing the production of metal fasteners, Bob Bingham died in February 2025, and people are still arguing on the internet about whether his voice was real. It was. Number 8. The Israeli military accidentally became part of the film. One of the most jarring moments in Jesus Christ Superstar is the sequence where Carl Anderson, as Judas, is alone in the desert wrestling with guilt. And suddenly Israeli fighter jets scream overhead at full speed. The moment feels so deliberate, so precisely timed, that most viewers assume it's Jewison's intentional commentary on the timelessness of violence. Ancient betrayal, modern warfare. Same story, different weapons. Carl Anderson always said his reaction was genuine. He had no warning those jets were coming. What you see on screen is a man who was simply surprised by deafening military aircraft appearing out of nowhere during his take. Jewison characteristically never quite confirmed this. He just kept the shot. He'd already made deliberate anachronistic choices throughout the film, modern soldiers, contemporary weapons, tanks on the horizon, to suggest that Christ's execution wasn't a historical event, but an ongoing one. The visual clash between biblical robes and military hardware was intentional in concept, but the jets, the exact timing, that was the desert deciding to participate. 2 weeks after they started shooting, the Munich massacre would prove just how present that violence really was. Quick pause before we hit the top 7. Which character do you think is the real dramatic heart of this film, Jesus or Judas? Drop it in the comments. It's one of the most argued questions about this movie, and I want to know where you land. Hit like and subscribe while you're down there so you don't miss our next deep dive. Now, back to it. Number 7. Religious groups protested every single night. From the moment Jesus Christ Superstar opened on Broadway on October 12, 1971, protesters showed up every single night. For 711 performances across nearly 2 years, demonstrators gathered outside the Mark Hellinger Theater. Jewish groups called it anti-Semitic, claiming it perpetuated the dangerous myth of collective Jewish responsibility for Christ's death. Christian groups called it blasphemous. The rock music, the humanized Jesus, the sympathetic Judas, the suggestion of something romantic between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and the ending that stopped at the crucifixion without a resurrection. Everyone had a grievance. The show had enough material to offend almost anyone if they looked hard enough. The production company gave the cast specific instructions. Don't talk to the protesters, don't engage, and, this is a direct quote from Ted Neeley, they might punch you in the face. Actors used back doors. They avoided eye contact. The protests were organized, sustained, and every single night. And then something quietly remarkable happened. Nobody announced it. There wasn't a press release or a moment of public reconsideration. But somewhere in the late 1970s and into the 1980s, churches started performing Jesus Christ Superstar. Youth groups started using the music, Easter services started incorporating the songs, the denominations that had been outside holding signs started staging their own productions. The rock opera that religious leaders said would lead people away from Christ became a way of bringing young people into churches. The film that was supposed to destroy faith became inseparable from how a generation experienced Easter. Not one of those protesters ever publicly said they were wrong. They just quietly started putting on the show. Number 6, the bus framing. Jesus never comes back. Jesus Christ Superstar begins with a bus pulling up to the Israeli desert. Young actors in modern clothing, hippies essentially, jump out and start unloading props. Crosses, robes, scaffolding. They're a theater troupe arriving to perform the Passion of Christ. The film is their performance. And then Jesus dies on the cross. The performance ends. The cast, out of costume, boards the bus to leave. One by one, they climb on. Mary Magdalene moves slowly. Carl Anderson, as Judas, is the very last. He turns to look back at the empty crosses one final time before stepping on. Ted Neeley never appears, and he's simply absent. Not dead on the cross, not standing nearby, just gone. The bus pulls away with one empty seat and no explanation. Jewison has never given a definitive reading of this, and the ambiguity feels completely intentional. Some see the missing Jesus as a denial of the resurrection. The actor went home because the story is over and there's nothing more to tell. Others see his absence as the opposite. He's the only one who didn't stop playing the role. He transcended the performance. He's still out there. The film refuses to tell you what to believe. It just shows you an empty seat on a bus and an empty cross on a hill, and lets you decide what that means. Mary Magdalene and Judas looking back as the bus pulls away, both of them waiting for someone who never came. Whether that's tragedy or transcendence depends entirely on what you bring to the moment. Number 5, the temple scene destroyed everything in 2 takes. The temple scene required Jesus, overwhelmed by lepers and merchants and money changers, to finally snap, tearing through the marketplace, overturning tables, smashing pottery, destroying everything in reach. Jewison's crew had carefully stockpiled props, dozens of tables, baskets, pottery, fabrics, all of it positioned and dressed for the multiple takes that a sequence like this would normally require. Then Ted Neeley happened. The first take was stunning. Neeley threw himself into the destruction with such unrestrained physical fury that crew members watching from behind the cameras were genuinely shocked by the intensity. Every piece of pottery smashed, every table destroyed, every prop in the set gone. They reset for take 2. Neeley did it again. By the time the second take wrapped, the prop team was standing in the wreckage doing the mental arithmetic, and the answer wasn't good. There simply wasn't enough left to shoot a third take. Neeley later laughed about it in interviews, saying he'd been given the chance to play Clint Eastwood, destroying everything in sight. What he doesn't mention is that the prop master almost certainly aged 10 years that afternoon. Fortunately, Jewison had everything he needed. The temple scene in the finished film is raw, chaotic, and genuinely unsettling. You can see the sweat, the physical exhaustion, the strain on Neeley's face. That's not performance technique. That's a man who just demolished an entire marketplace in the desert heat with nothing held back. 2 takes, that was all they had, and it was enough. Number 4. John Travolta auditioned at 17. In the early 1970s, a 17-year-old kid from New Jersey named John Travolta showed up to audition for Jesus Christ Superstar. He was unknown. He had minimal stage experience. He was going up against performers who'd been working Broadway for years. He didn't get the part. That wasn't surprising. Ted Neeley had been understudying the role on Broadway, had the vocal range, had the stage presence. Travolta was a teenager with potential, and not much else to show for it yet. What's interesting is what happened next. Producer Robert Stigwood, the man behind the film, reportedly made a mental note of the kid who didn't get Jesus. He saw something, just not that. 4 years later, in 1977, Stigwood cast John Travolta as Tony Manero in Saturday Night Fever. The white suit, the disco floor, the swagger. Travolta became the defining star of late 1970s cinema, earned his first Academy Award nomination, and made a cultural footprint that's still visible today. Stigwood didn't see Jesus Christ in that audition room. He saw Tony Manero, and that made all the difference. Number 3, Ted and Carl were cast for their real friendship. When Ted Neeley and Carl Anderson did their screen test together at Pinewood Studios in London, the chemistry was immediate. Jewison saw it instantly. According to both actors, he told them after casting was confirmed exactly why they'd gotten the roles. He wanted the authentic connection between them visible on screen, the genuine affection between Jesus and his betrayer that makes the betrayal truly devastating. Their friendship was real, and it lasted over 30 years. In 1992, they reunited for the 20th anniversary tour of Jesus Christ Superstar, and both men insisted they would only do it together. The tour was planned for 3 months. It ran for 5 years, grossed over $100 million, and gave Anderson the chance to reprise Judas over 1,700 times with Neeley beside him. Carl Anderson was diagnosed with leukemia in 2003. He died on February 23, 2004 at age 58. Ted Neeley sang Gethsemane, the anguished prayer Jesus delivers the night before his arrest, at Anderson's memorial service. Watch their scenes together knowing that. The way Judas looks at Jesus, the pain in both their faces during the betrayal. That's not just acting. That's 2 people who loved each other performing the end of everything. Number 2, none of the lead actors were Christian. Here's the final irony of Jesus Christ Superstar. The film that some claim brought more people to Christianity than anything in modern popular culture was made almost entirely by people approaching the material from outside traditional religious faith. Norman Jewison wasn't Jewish, despite everyone's assumptions, but he wasn't particularly religious either. He was Protestant by upbringing and approached the story as a human drama. Ted Neeley has described himself over the years as spiritual rather than traditionally Christian in the conventional sense. Carl Anderson never publicly identified as a practicing Christian in interviews from that era. Yvonne Elliman's faith, if any, wasn't something she discussed publicly during production. Some people argue this was a deliberate choice by Jewison, that if you want to explore Jesus as a man rather than a deity, if you want to strip away the certainty and sit with the doubt, then you need actors who can approach the story without religious doctrine already telling them how to feel about it. Others say it was simply coincidence. Jewison cast the best performers for the roles and didn't factor in their Sunday morning habits. What's undeniable is that these people weren't trying to convert anyone. They were telling a human story about friendship, betrayal, doubt, and a man walking toward his death. And somehow, removing the religious agenda made the film more powerful, not less. The film doesn't tell you Jesus is divine. It doesn't confirm the resurrection. It doesn't answer the theological questions. It just shows you a man facing death and asks what you see. Maybe that's exactly why the people who initially protested it eventually embraced it. The film made by non-believers didn't tell Christians what to think. It gave them space to feel. Number 1, a real shepherd wandered into the final shot. The final image of Jesus Christ Superstar is one of the most spiritually resonant moments in religious cinema. The camera slowly pulls back from the empty cross, silhouetted against a setting desert sun. Then, at the base of the hill, a lone shepherd walks across the frame with his flock of sheep. Beautiful, perfect, symbolic. The good shepherd returned to tend his flock even after death. For decades, viewers assumed this was Jewison's carefully planned metaphor, the deliberate culmination of everything the film had been building toward. In DVD commentary and at screenings and Q&A sessions over the years, both Ted Neeley and Norman Jewison have told the same story. That shepherd was never planned, scripted, or staged. He was a real Bedouin shepherd who wandered onto a closed film set, while the crew was capturing a sunset shot of the empty crosses. Some accounts say the crew only realized what had happened when they reviewed the footage later. Other versions say they saw him crossing the frame in real time but kept rolling rather than call cut. Either way, nobody directed it. Nobody placed him there. The set was supposed to be secured. How a local shepherd with his flock walked straight through at that exact moment, nobody has ever been able to explain. Neeley has said it gives him goosebumps every time he thinks about it. Jewison confirmed in the DVD commentary that the Bedouin walked onto the set, blocked off, supposedly secured, and when the crew saw the footage, the timing struck all of them the same way, a shepherd crossing the hill at the moment the camera was resting on an empty cross. Given what shepherds mean in Christian teaching, given what that image was going to close the film on, they kept the shot. They kept it because trying to recreate it deliberately would have felt fake. They kept it because sometimes an accident is more honest than intention. And there you have it. 15 weird facts about the film that was held together by accidents, filmed in a war zone, protested as blasphemy, and became an Easter tradition. Think about what this movie actually was. A Methodist minister's son from Toronto, who the whole world thought was Jewish. A man who wanted to play Judas and wound up playing Jesus 5,000 times. A 17-year-old from New Jersey who got rejected and became Tony Manero instead. Fighter jets nobody ordered. A temple scene with exactly enough props for 2 takes and no margin for error. A bus that leaves with 1 empty seat. And at the very end, when everything was supposed to be carefully controlled, a shepherd nobody planned, walking into the last shot at the exact right second to make the whole thing feel like something more than a film. Nothing went according to plan. And yet here we are, 50 years later, still talking about it. Which fact surprised you the most? Do you think that shepherd was divine intervention or just extraordinary timing? Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to Remember That Time for more deep dives into the films that refuse to let us go. Share this with anyone who thinks they already know everything about Jesus Christ Superstar. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most spiritual moments are the ones nobody planned at all.